Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing a Blue Ox base plate on a 2023 Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe. When it comes to flat towing any vehicle, there's going to be 5 main components that are always going to be required, and you may have some extra pieces that you'll add in depending on the vehicle, but starting with the first component, it's going to be your base plate. And that's going to be the structural mounting point on the frame of the vehicle that allows you to hook up the rest of the components and safely tow it down the road. That connecting point between the base plate and the RV is going to be your tow bar. You also, just like pulling a trailer, have safety chains. So that way, in case of an accidental disconnect, it's still attached from RV to the vehicle. So we have our cables attached there. You'll also have a supplemental braking system. So as you slow and stop in your RV, it should do the same thing on your towed vehicle. And in case of a catastrophic disconnect, you have a breakaway switch, which if that cable's pulled, it's going to apply the brakes on the vehicle so it's not rolling down the highway. We also have diode wiring, and that's going to transmit the light signals from the RV to the taillights on the towed vehicle, giving you your running lights, your turn signals, as well as your brake lights. Now, on some different systems, if you have air brakes on your coach, you'll see we have this air cable, but all of your braking systems will have that breakaway switch. Now, on this vehicle, the other things that we wanted to pick up were smart diodes. So making sure that we have those to work with the variable voltage LED taillights is going to be key, and also a charge line that trickle charges your battery while going down the road. Now this is what your base plate is going to look like when it's installed, and Blue Ox has actually done a really good job of allowing you to maintain your tow hooks, which is nice. You get to maintain that cool look, especially on the 4xe. You have those blue ones that stand out, but also they utilize this lower grill portion for your removable arms as well as your safety chain loops. And the fact that it uses this small spot is really nice because it's a really clean look overall. You can even see where the arms attach. It barely sticks out, and your safety chain loops are just enough to where you can hook it up. So that really results giving you a nice clean look overall, but still all the usability of that base plate. It also comes with a good mounting point up front for your 6-pole wiring that extends out, allows you to mount that up easy, and they give you a bracket that works really well for a breakaway switch. And also I was able to mount up our air fitting for our Air Force One. So those included portions, as well as the way that it lays out on the front fascia, makes it a great finished product. And when you normally drive around and not in flat tow mode, there are caps to put in the removable arm portion to keep any dust, dirt, and debris from building up in there. And the great part too is when you are ready to hook up, the arms simply just twist in and then they'll lock in place with a quick quarter turn. Now, something that's going to be important is going to be the height of your base plate, and that's going to help you determine whether or not you need a rise or drop when hooking up your tow bar, because you want your tow bar to be in a nice level plane within a 3-inch variance. So measuring our base plate today, we're coming in right at about 20.5 inches. Now in flat tow mode, this has the air suspension. It needs to be in the normal height setting. So that air suspension can adjust, but when in flat tow mode, that's going to be the measurement that you need. So you can take that, measure the hitch on your RV up from the ground to the center of the hitch pin hole, and then if it's over 3 inches or under 3 inches, you're going to want to take a look at a high-low adapter like we have on our RV. Now when you're ready to hook up all of your flat tow components, you'll have your tow bar that you'll see we have Blue Ox ends on our Blue Ox, which is great. But that doesn't mean that you have to stick with a Blue Ox tow bar. In fact, you can get really any brand. Just make sure that you get the adapters that work with the Blue Ox base plate, and then you'll be good to go. So we'll get this all hooked up, and your tow bar is going to be where you get your pins to attach this. So pretty easy. We just slide this in, pin this up with our linch pin. And then I tell people on your base plate, just go across, and every connection point of all your components need to attach to the RV somehow. So you'll see we have our safety chain loops. We'll get that attached. And it's nice that these are pretty open here, so even a larger Clevis style safety chain loop goes on there just fine. We also have our braking system components. We'll get those attached. And once you have everything all hooked up, you'll just get your vehicle in flat tow mode, and then you're ready to tow your Grand Cherokee down the road. The finished product of this base plate I'm really happy with. I will say the installation is, it's a decent amount of work, and you're gonna be drilling quite a bit. This vehicle in general has a lot of different steps that you'll have to take to be able to get the fascia off and make way for the base plate to attach. This is one that I've done before, and it didn't really get any easier. There's a decent amount of drilling, decent amount of cutting, but again, at the end of the day, you're gonna have a base plate that looks really good. If this is something that's maybe beyond your scope, you don't have the space, the tools, or even the want to do this, you can use eTrailer's dealer network locator to find a dealer close to you that's gonna be able to get this installed for you and save a lot of that trouble. Something I will point out though, if you are doing this yourself, you will want to make sure that you have all of your flat toe components ready to go, because when you have the fascia off, it's a lot easier to get all of your other components installed. But for those of you that are going to be doing this, follow along and I'll show you how to get it installed. To begin our installation, we're going to have a series of plastic push pins that we're going to be removing, and throughout this entire installation, the whole fascia is coming off. There's going to be a ton of different hardware that we're going to want to keep handy in a nice organized spot. It'll make reinstallation a lot easier. So have a nice organized spot to keep all this, and it's going to save you a lot of headache long term. And with plastic push pins, they're fairly easy to remove. You'll have a slot on these, and so with a trim panel tool, you can pry up on the center. You can also use a flathead screwdriver here, and those will work just fine. If it does separate, just make sure that you get the bottom piece pulled out and try to keep these together. So we'll go through, and this whole panel, anywhere where there's a plastic push pin, we'll get those taken off. Now we can pull this cover off, and we'll set it aside for now. Where the grill attaches to the radiator support, you're going to find that we have a T40 Torx bit to remove the bolts. There's just going to be 6 of them, so we'll get those taken out. We're also going to have 2 10mm bolts that we're going to remove. So we'll have one on this side. The other side as well. Now we'll head to each of our wheel wells with an 8mm socket, and there's going to be just screws attached here on the wheel well liner. So work your way all the way in and then work your way up, getting 5 of them removed. If you need a little bit of extra space, you know, I have a electric ratchet, which makes it a little bit easier here, but you can always hop in the vehicle, turn the steering wheel, you know, one way or the other, depending on which side, to really open that up to make it a little bit easier on you. So I'll go through and I'll get these screws removed. So with those removed, now we can take the wheel aligner and just kind of put your fingers behind it and work your way out. And eventually, when you get to where the fascia meets the front front fender here, you're going to find that there's a 10mm bolt that runs in this way. So it's a little tricky to get to, but right here I have my finger on the head of the bolt, so we'll go ahead and get that taken off. Now we're also going to be taking this wheel well trim, we're going to snap this back, and that way we can eventually get the fascia taken off, as this is kind of locked in with it. So what you'll want to do is just kind of push on that plastic a little bit, and there's just going to be a series of clips. So just work your way up slowly, and you should be able to get these to remove. Now the trick also is don't pull this too far back. You don't want it to crease. That can cause damage to the paint. So just take your time here, and if you need to, you can grab a trim panel tool and get behind here. And some of these clips, you can actually reach back. The white clips, it's just you pinch those together. So if you want to, you can actually take a socket or a set of pliers to pinch those together. And to make this a little bit easier and reduce the chances of those clips breaking, just with my 8mm socket, I'll just put this on the ends, on the back side of that clip, and that's going to pinch those in, making it a little bit easier to get removed. So we'll have these blue clips, but the white ones, you can see that's where I just slid the socket on. That'll pinch that together, making it a lot easier. So once you get to this point, you just want to have the clips pulled back enough to where we can gain access to the fascia coming off. So I'll do one more clip and we should be okay. There we are. And if the clips come off, you know, just make sure you're pulling those off so you have them later for reinstallation. And that way we'll have it all be able to snap in together. And something else that I like to do just for a little added protection is run painter's tape along the seam, because as we pull this off, it is going to rub a little bit, and we don't want our clear coat or anything to get scratched in the process. And as far as the wheel well trim that we just removed, what you can do is just take a paper towel and roll it up in a bundle, and that way you'll have a gap here, so it'll make it easier to pull this off later. So with my paper towel just kind of wedged back there, I'm going to go ahead and repeat all the same steps on the other side of the vehicle. Underneath the vehicle, we need to separate the belly pan from the fascia. So there's just going to be some 10mm bolts across here. We're also going to have some that are tucked back a little bit further. So it's a total of 9. So looks like we have 6 of them here. 2 are in the insets, and then we have the one kind of by the where the drain for the oil change would go. So we'll just get this taken out. And pulling down this panel, we're going to see that we also have 2 plastic push pins, one on each side. So we'll get those removed. At this point, we're ready to pull our fascia off. So you're going to want to have a nice safe place to keep this, especially if you're doing the rest of your flat toe components. You're going to have it off for a little bit, and you want to make sure it doesn't get damaged in the process. So get that set up. And you're going to want an extra set of hands. I have Ian helping me today, and what we're going to do is we're going to start by peeling at the corners and working our way towards the center. But this vehicle does have connections that are electrical, as well as a squirter for the front camera that we're going to want to separate. So as we pull this off and gain access to those, just make sure you're not yanking the fascia and putting stress on those wires. So I'll just reach back and grab the portion of the fascia, and there's just going to be a series of clips. So as you kind of pop those out, just put pressure as you go, and it should come off fairly easily. And when you get to the front top portion here, you're going to have this part that you're going to want to lift up, and there's some locking alignment tabs here that kind of hold that in place. So you may need to peel this portion up a little bit. If you want to, you can also remove this plastic, but we should be able to get this to separate. And that alignment, you'll see this opening where we originally had hardware. You're just going to raise the plastic up over that. We also have these hood stops. If you need to, you can twist those out. But if you lift over that, that's going to allow the fascia to kind of slowly peel off. And at this point, this is when we're going to start looking for those connections. So on the driver's side, the 2 plugs that we'll have are going to be right at the corner here. And we should be able to separate these. There's going to be a locking tab. You'll see a red portion. Pull that back. That'll unlock it, and then you'll push in that section where that red tab was to get that separated. And then just go down a little bit, and you're going to find another connector. This is going to be a main harness connector. So we're going to find the tab here. As soon as I get this removed, I'll show you exactly where it's at. But you can separate these off to make it a little bit easier. It's just a plastic push pin if you need to. But let's find this locking tab and get this separated. So same thing, there's a tab that you'll pull back, the white tab here, and then you just push on this section. That'll separate that. Now on the passenger side, you're going to have a very similar style clip that we just had for the main harness style. So I'll get that off first. And then there's this connection here. Pretty sure this is for the camera. So we're also going to get that separated. So on the end, you push the tab, and that should unlock it, allowing us to get this off. There we are. And then we also have that squirter, as I mentioned. Now, what I like to do, so it's not dripping out the rest of your washer fluid reservoir, is to have vice grips ready sometimes, or if you can pull the hose up to where it's going to be higher than the reservoir, that'll keep the water from going out. So to get this separated, push on the wider end. That's going to open that up and allow us to pull that apart. And you'll see it's going to start leaking here. So if you want to fix that right away, a small pair of vice grips, you just pinch on that hose, and that should cause that to stop the leak. Now we'll take our fascia and set it aside. Now we're going to remove our tow hooks on both sides. There's 2 16mm bolts that we'll get taken off first, and then a large nut on the back side. Now don't let that scare you off. There's a little bit of thread lock, but a lot of times you can, once you get them loose, you can start to get them by hand, but you will want a large crescent wrench or a pair of channel locks to at least bite down and get it started. And with those out, it's going to make it a lot easier to start to get this loosened up. So as I mentioned, a pair of channel locks or a large crescent wrench, just put that on the head of the bolt and then loosen that up just a little bit. And once you get that started, having a little bit of rotation on the tow hook will allow you to kind of ratchet that off. So it may take a little bit, but for the most part, you can generally get these with your hand and just start to rotate it to get this off, and we'll get them removed. So now you can set your tow hooks aside as well as that nut and hold on to them because we'll be reinstalling them later. Now, right where our tow hooks bolted up are going to be the mounting points for our bumper beam, and this is not going to be reinstalled either. Our base plate's going to live right here. So to get this removed, it's also going to be two 16mm bolts on each side, so top and bottom here. So we'll get those removed first. Now, in between where the two bolts were for our tow hook, you're also going to find a 10mm nut, so we'll get that taken off as well. Once you have that hardware removed, this should just slide out. And then, as I mentioned, we're not going to be reinstalling this, so you can do whatever you want with your bumper beam. Now, we have a 4xe model, so being that it's going to have that hybrid, it has a pedestrian alert, and that's what makes the noise as you're driving around with the electric engine. This will need to be removed from the brackets. We're going to just kind of let it hang here for a little bit, so if you have some zip ties that you want to zip tie it up with, by all means. The 10mm are tucked back here, so we'll get those removed. Now we're also going to be moving the horns, and we're going to have one on each side, and we're going to unplug this so we have a little bit more room. So just as before, there's a locking red tab. Pull that down, push it in, and that should drop down. Now we obviously are going to be reinstalling these later, so just hold on to these, and it's going to be a 10mm bolt up top also holding it in, so we'll get that removed. Now, where that plug was that went into our horns, you'll see that this portion has a plastic Christmas tree that holds in tight. We're going to want to remove this because we're going to be trimming a large portion of this out to make room for our base plate. Now it's time to grab safety glasses and a cutting utensil. So I'll be using an angle grinder. If you have a Sawzall, that'll work well. Even a Dremel, if you take your time, will work. And we're going to be notching out this portion of the frame. So I taped it off on both sides, so it should be this large portion coming out. So just take your time here, and we'll get this notched out. Now I'm just going to go back with a paddle wheel here on our angle grinder just to kind of get those sharp edges knocked down. Now being that this is raw exposed metal, you're also going to want to clean this up, make sure that there's no metal shavings, and then what we'll do is spray some paint along here. Just because that's raw exposed metal, you want to make sure that doesn't turn to rust and corrosion long term, and a little bit of paint will cover that up. Now this plastic air dam will also need to be trimmed out, so I kind of marked this along here. It just goes to the top. So I'll be using just a pair of snips. You can use a utility knife. Just be careful that you're not making contact with any electrical or any other components here. So we'll get this cut out, and we're going to be doing this on both sides. The studs that originally had that 10mm nut for the bumper impact beam, we're going to take those out, and they're just tack welded on. So what you're going to want to do is grab a pair of vice grips and then just kind of clamp down on it, and we're going to shake it loose a little bit, and that last little bit we should be able to get with a hammer. So just kind of twist it if you can, and it should loosen up fairly easily. And with a hammer, you should be able to pop it out like that. So a large crescent wrench, or I have my channel locks here, that should be enough to get this to loosen it up at least. And that tube should stay in place, so just get that loose. and then we can get it removed from the back side. So similar to the back nut that we took off, once you kind of knock it loose a little bit, you should be able to get it by hand. And if it does fight you, just put that back on it and spin it until we get this removed. And then the tube, we can actually slide out from the back once we have the nut off. Now I've done this same base plate on a Grand Cherokee a while back, and this part I found a way that's going to make it a little bit easier for you, because you'll see there's an access hole here on our frame on the passenger side, and when we put our base plate up, this is going to be the access hole where we feed our whiz nuts in, or our handle nuts I should say, and that way we can get it all bolted into the frame. But on the driver's side, you'll see there is no hole. So we do need to use a hole saw to mark that out. And they'll give you a measurement that's, I think, 4 inches down, and you'll make that hole. But to make it a little easier and take the guesswork out of it, what I recommend doing, grab your base plate and also the bolts that you remove from the bumper beam. We're going to use those to hold this up, and then it'll create the template for us. So as I hold this up, just thread it on a little bit on each side so it'll hold itself. This is also a great time to check for any clearances on trimming, whether it be the plastic or the frame. It should go on fairly easily, and if you need to, you can always trim out a little bit more. So with this aligned, you can see both the holes, even on the bottom here, are aligned. We'll just take our paint marker, and this hole is what we're going to want to drill out. So I'll just take my paint marker, mark that, and that way it's going to be perfectly aligned. It's not going to be, off-centered, creating a smaller hole for us to feed our hardware in. So with that marked out, that's going to give us the spot for our 1¼ inch hole saw to drill through there. So we can take our base plate back down and keep this hardware handy, because once we get that drilled out, we'll be putting it back in place. If you really wanted to, you could take your hole saw and put it in that opening and drill through, but I'm going to pull this off and do it without the base plate in the way. Now, just as before, since this is raw exposed metal, we just want to prevent any rust, so we'll get some paint on here. Now, grab those bolts from the bumper beam that we used to hold the base plate up, and we're going to get ready to put it in place. But before we do that, we are going to put some thread lock on here, and really all the steps from here on out, any of the hardware that we have, we are going to want to make sure that we're putting thread lock on it. That way, long term, these are just going to have a little bit more resistance to ever come loose. So I'll get all my thread lock on. We'll get our base plate raised in place and get 2 of the bolts started. Now the holes are slotted a little bit, and that's probably to allow for any tolerances from the factory. But now's a good time. Make sure those top ones are in. The bottom ones should align, but also just kind of make sure it's centered up as much as possible. The best way I'd say to check is kind of the gaps here on the side. Just make sure that's nice and aligned and that everything's in the center. And with all those started, we'll take our 16mm socket and snug them down. Now on the side, you'll see that there's 4 holes, and all of these in this square, we need to drill them out with a 1/2 inch drill bit. And we're going to eventually be feeding our hardware through there. So if you grab the bolt included in your hardware, you might want that to test to make sure it'll slide in. But we do want to make sure that these are drilled out nice and clean. So with the 1/2 inch bit, what I'll do is I'm going to just center it up and get it started. And that's going to kind of create that center punch for us. If you need to, you can put a pilot bit and then work it up to a larger bit. It's up to you. But it's going to be a lot of drilling. Make sure you have some batteries ready, because we'll do these 4. And then we're also going to be doing it on the other side. Now with all of those holes finally drilled out, again, test to make sure that the bolt passes through nice and easy, because getting these bolted up is already kind of a trick. So having a little bit of extra room. So if you take that drill bit and kind of work it around just to make it nice and easy for this to pass in, you can see this one is kind of binding, so I'll enlarge that. But we're going to start by getting our whiz nuts in place, and that's going to be just basically a serrated flange nut that's tack welded onto a small little wire here, and that's going to allow us to get this in place in the back side. So where we drilled that hole, it's going to feed in, and we'll get this aligned and bolt this up. But we need to make sure that we're putting our Loctite on here, and we'll get this first one in place. And we're not going to completely tighten this first one down because we're going to be putting a spacer block in place. So if you can see our threads of that serrated flange nut right there. I'm going to get this started by just threading it in, and take your time, make sure that it is threading in properly. And with that just hand tightened in place, we'll take our spacer block, and this is going to slide in. So you may have to kind of slide this up to align it in place, but this is going to create basically a spacer that's going to close up the gap in between our base plate and the frame. So as I drop this down, you should have it resting on the threads of that bolt. So just make sure you get it in dropped properly. And then the hole that's right here should also be aligned. So we'll also get our whiz nut and our bolts started here. And you may find that you'll need to put a bend to get the face of that serrated flange nut in place so you can start threading it. So put any bends as necessary. Now this step took quite a bit of time, and the reason I found is as I was drilling, the back part of the metal kind of walks itself out, and those burrs were causing issue with, I couldn't always get that whiz nut flat to get it started, and this could be solved if Blue Ox included a little bit longer bolts. I think that's a lot better, but what I ended up doing is taking a burr bit and running it in and kind of working around the corners to knock down some of that flashing for it to get started. Now once it's started on all of them, a 3/4 inch socket, we're just going to go through and take your time here, just get them snug down by hand first, and then we'll come back with our torque wrench. But we're going to leave these on here, that way that nut's not spinning around. And once you have them snug down, you'll come back with the same socket and a torque wrench, and take a look at the torque setting chart found in the instruction manual to get the torque setting. This is going to be important because it's going to make sure that long term, obviously, it's going to be tight enough to hold our base plate in place, but also not too tight, putting stress on the hardware to where it can become damaged. So get these torqued down first. Once they're torqued down, the handle nuts, we're going to take these tabs off, and you can just cut them. You can kind of wiggle them back and forth, and a lot of times that weld will pop off. I found that if you're careful with the hammer and just hit directly on it with some force, normally that'll pop it loose. It may take a little bit of time here, but yeah, you can wiggle it around, move them around, and eventually that will pop off. So go ahead, you can get both sides torqued down, and then we'll get these removed. If you're still struggling with these, you can just cut them off as long as they're not causing any issue here. But you can also take a pry bar, a long flathead screwdriver, and wedge that against the nut. And a lot of times if you just give it a quick pop with a hammer, it's enough to knock that loose. So I'm going to try that on here. Now we officially have our base plate pretty well installed, but there's going to be a few more things that we need to do, including getting our tubes back in and our tow bar, or our tow hooks. So we'll start by getting these in place. And this should get interesting because clearance-wise, it's pretty tight against the base plate. So we'll do our best here to get this all tightened down. Not too bad. Now with our tubes in place, we can grab our tow hooks. And we're going to slide these in place and get the nut hand tightened on for now. And we're going to be using new hardware here on our base plate. So What we'll do is we'll tighten this down enough, and then we'll grab the remaining hardware that we have, and that's going to bolt through these new points. And the hardware combination we're going to use are there are 3/8 bolts. We'll have a split washer and a flat washer. And the top one, pretty easy. We just put in place with our Loctite. And then we have a nylon lock nut, and that's going to just tighten down. The bottom's going to be similar. Hardware is going to be the same here up top, but we're going to be using the smaller whiz nuts to feed that up and bolt that into place on the lower portion. Now once you have that all in place, you can go ahead and tighten and torque that down. Now we do need to make a few more attachment points, so we're going to head over to the pedestrian alert device, and we're going to take the clips off of it. So you'll find those clips on the portion that we cut off when we trimmed out the frame, and we'll get these removed. The best way to do this, I've found, is you just grab a flathead screwdriver and pry up so you can get the teeth to where they're not biting on the plastic, and then you can kind of wedge these out. So if you can, open it up to where you can get your screwdriver on this end, and then it comes off fairly easily. This is going to clip into this spot here and create the mounting point for our hardware to go back in place so we can get the pedestrian alert back in its home spot. So take these off real quick. So those clips, we'll just slide these on. You'll have this outward portion facing towards the front. Then we can grab our pedestrian alert alarm here and bolt this back in place using the factory hardware that it came off of. And once you have the alert system in place, we're going to get our safety cables, and this is going to be the last line of defense. If everything was to fail, all of the hardware that we put in place, these are going to attach it to the frame of the vehicle. So there is a spot right here where you can put your quick link, and then we're just simply going to wrap this around the frame and then reattach it here. So I'll get mine looped up and then I'll show you how it looks. So I ended up running it through the opening kind of tucked back here. I reached back and grabbed the other end, wrapped it around, and now I have them both on my quick link. Now if you are running this back through there, just make sure it's not going to rub on anything that's moving, and you can always zip tie any of the excess up, but I got ours here in place. And at this point, we have our horns. We have a few things obviously that we'll need to put back in place. We're also going to be trimming the fascia, but right now is a perfect time to get the rest of your components in place. You'll be able to run your wires nice and clean, and that's what we're going to do. So once I get everything put back in place, we'll come back and I'll show you how to get everything put back on the vehicle and ready to flat tow. Now I went ahead, I got my fascia put back on, and we got everything mounted up. And the way that I did it is the bracket included with our base plate allowed me to mount up our breakaway switch. I did have to trim out a little bit, but I used the same bracket and drilled a hole and mounted up our bracket for our air fitting. I did have to trim up top to make clearance for our air line, but I think this is a good spot to where I can still hook up nice and easy, and there's clearance across the board. And that was a look at installation of the Blue Ox base plate on a 2023 Jeep Grand Cherokee 4xe.